Welcome to another episode of Becca's Talking here. Everybody loves the true crime podcast. You'll always see true crime, I can't even talk. True crime podcasts are like always at the top of the list. But those true crime podcasts are always some similar thing where it's like, this woman lived in a small Midwestern town and she was murdered and they think the husband did it. But, it's always that sort of a thing. This is a true crime podcast, but from a whole different perspective. It's from the perspective of the police officer. I'm talking about Paul Milone here. Paul is was an undercover cop and a member of the Omaha SWAT team, and he has written a book called Ram 1. Ram 1, which is just basically your life on the force, right? I mean, that's as I'm reading the book, I'm hearing stories and anecdotes about the crimes that you had to deal with.
Yeah, basically it's my 23 years in the department, whether that's uniform patrol or the lion's share on SWAT and also undercover. It's just stories from different days on the job here in Omaha.
Now, what made you want to be an undercover cop as opposed to just a regular cop or maybe even just a cop at all?
When I was a young cop in Northeast Omaha, I would see an undercover cop, Steve Jenham, walk across the parking lot, and he just looked so badass, I guess.
Yeah.
And long hair and beard. Like, man, that's cool. This guy's a cop. How do you do that? And I started looking in a little bit more, and I thought, man, I want to try that at some point. And so I started kind of trying to carve my career towards working in that aspect.
Is there a waiting list to be an undercover cop, or is that a job that is coveted by a lot of officers, or were they looking for people like you to do it?
Yeah, it's not necessarily a waiting list thing. You have to be in narcotics, and to get to narcotics, sometimes it takes a little bit of time and some luck, but also, again, not everybody that works in narcotics works undercover. In fact, most don't. There's actually very few undercover officers, in total across the country. Somebody who works in narcotics wearing jeans and T-shirts and plain clothes is just out there plain clothes, and they assist undercovers while also working their own cases. So the true undercovers, there's not as many as people would think.
Okay, now my images of this, okay, and maybe it's all based on movies and TV shows and stuff, is that you're a cop, but you got to live the life of an undercover guy. And, so you're living the life of a drug user. You're living the life of a petty thief. You're living the life of a gun smuggler or whatever it might be. And you're not really living any other sort of a life. But that's not the case, is it? I mean, this was kind of like a job for you. And then after the job was over, you went home, right?
Yeah, see, and, the way I did it and the way we did it here, I'm not living in some apartment 24/7. I still lived at home. I know I'd come into work and I would do cases on that particular day, and then I would get into my role. So you had to have the mindset, most of the time, and you had to have cover stories all of the time. But I wasn't living it 100% of the time, and I was also assigned to the SWAT team. So, I'd get out of my dirty clothes and I'd get in my SWAT gear and go ram a door and go back and reverse the roles again.
There's actually a funny story in the book. I don't know if it's a funny story, but an interesting story in the book, in that your first, or one of your first SWAT team events, or at least it's the first story in the book, is there was a man dealing with severe mental health problems, had a sword and a baby, and was locked in an apartment and was going to basically cut the baby's head off. And your job was to try to defuse the situation, save the child, and do what you had to do. Now, your job undercover was to not have your name out there. But then when you got to be a SWAT member, you had to put on, the vest and the Kevlar and all that, and you had your name on the back of your vest. So one of the neighbors of this crazy man in the apartment called your name out.
He did.
Yeah. Was that because, I mean, you went to when you went into SWAT, you wore a mask to cover your face so that they wouldn't recognize the undercover guy from the SWAT guy. But there you had your name on it.
Yeah, that was kind of a unique situation. It was a hostage rescue event, which is a rarity in the United States. Unfortunately, it's happening more often, but it happens around the world more so than the United States to have a legitimate hostage rescue. And that's what we had that night. A guy was mentally deranged and wanted to kill his 9-day-old baby. It was it was a really hard situation, and the Omaha Police Department did everything we could to save everybody's life. It just didn't work out that way, but yeah, having that guy.
You saved the baby's life, though.
We saved the baby's life.
And yeah.
Yes.
The poor man with the mental health problems didn't make it, but you saved the baby's life.
We did.
Any idea whatever happened to that child?
You know, it's funny, Tom, you asked that. I tried to track her down, you know, in a professional manner through our child victim services office, and they went through the state to try to locate her. 'Cause the baby's mom also had mental health issues and drug issues, so she was taken. The parental rights were taken from the mom after this event happened, and so I went through the state, and they said they just couldn't tell us. And I wanted to send her like an anonymous birthday gift every year, birthday card, something. But on a side note, although I wasn't able to have any contact or reach out, the baby's great grandmother had reached out to me via OPD, and she gave her number, so I called her at some point, and we had a relationship for several years. I think she's passed now, but she would call me every year on the anniversary of that event, and she was able to get some information on the baby yearly. You know, she didn't get to see her, but she would get updates from the state as to where, you know, how she's doing, things like that. So yeah, she'd probably be 13 years. Well, she would be 13 years old right now.
As far as you know, baby's doing okay, or the young lady's doing okay?
At last check, she was doing fine. Yeah.
Okay, so and you focus on this in the first chapter about the mental health issues, about this guy, because this guy thought he was king, and he had a throne and everything in the apartment, right? I mean, this guy, you know, generally thought, and he was, you know, very muscular from your description here, and thought he was king. So obviously he had mental health issues, and we can get into that a little bit later about mental health problems, because I think that's a main problem with society today. We don't do enough about mental health. But how do you recover from something like that? You shot and killed a man, and then you rescued a baby. I mean, you know, it's good day, bad day. You know, I can't imagine how you just decompress from something like that.
You know, it's something you try to prepare for, A, in the academy, B, in SWAT. You know, we got to train all the time, and you try to go through, you know, what ifs. What if this happens? Well, how am I going to deal with it? Of course, you have no idea until it happens. You know, but for me, a couple of big things were in play. Number one, my wife was involved. My wife was ended up being a 30-year police veteran, and she was the head of the negotiators at the time, the hostage negotiators. So we were able to kind of decompress, but also my faith was a big part of it. And then again, you know, the department requires officers to see a psychologist, a department contracted psychologist, for 3 or 4 meetings before they release you back to work. And if someone's having more trouble than another guy or gal, then they may keep you out for 2-3 weeks, months. You know, there's people that have been off duty for several months post shooting event like that. You know, but it's interesting. It never really affected me. I've never had a dream about it. Never had a nightmare about it. Any incurring thoughts. You know, that's what I was kind of required to do that night, and the training and camaraderie is what gets you through it.
Never any second thoughts, never ever doubt about what you did?
No, doubts about right or wrong, not in the least. I truly felt bad for the guy. I felt bad for his family, because again, like you mentioned, you know, mental health, it's our biggest failure in this country, in my mind. And if this guy had proper mental health treatment, you know, I don't know if that event would have happened.
Yeah. While we're talking about, like, you know, tragedies like this, you were also involved, one of the first people in the SWAT team in the Von Maur situation, the tragedy at Von Maur years ago. How do you deal with that? I mean, that was such a high-profile tragedy. Talk about what you did at Von Maur.
Well, so I wouldn't say I was one of the first SWAT guys there. There's in those events, you know, SWAT isn't always the first one there. And there were so many people working that day because, as the book talks about, President Bush had just left town, you know, an hour before. So there were so many cops already working. And so, you know, we weren't the first responders as far as the SWAT guys, you know. There was other guys that were quicker, and it was already over. But The hard part about them is, so here it is a mall, right? It's a white tile floor, and there's 8 victims, outside of the shooter, and it's not like a normal crime scene where one person might be shot and there's a couple drops of blood. I mean, there's blood everywhere, and there's Christmas music playing, and just because the event is over, at least with the shooter himself, and we had to clear the mall, the entire mall, and clearing a mall is nuts. There's just like most of those active shooters, there's false reports that come in unintentionally to where there's other shooters. We were told there was another shooter out in the parking lot by some trash dumpster. And this wasn't that far off of Columbine, where shooters then were leaving IEDs laying around. So we searched the entire mall for survivors, for other victims, for possibly other suspects. And searching a mall is an intense process. There's so many things in a mall that people don't see, as far as storerooms and back rooms and utility rooms and hallways and service elevators and all that. So we searched that entire mall 2 full times, probably closer to 3 times, in full gear, expecting to find someone. And we did find people hiding, and we were listening to cell phones ringing on the floor, and those were probably from family members trying to call either victims or someone who just dropped their phone and ran. Yeah, and so then that's over, and you're supposed to go home.
You just painted a picture that just blew me away. You're walking through the mall after these shootings, blood on the floor, and you're hearing Christmas music being played over the PA system.
Yeah.
That's surreal.
Yeah, it was. And again, the cell phones ringing it really didn't come into play till later. When we were leaving, it's like there's a whole line of cars coming into the mall at a hastily made checkpoint, like a security checkpoint in Iraq. And it didn't hit me till I was driving past, looking at the people in the cars. They were, our department had put out to the media, hey, if you're missing someone, go to Westroads. And so as I'm leaving to go home to my family, there's a line of 20-some cars coming in with people inside of it, and the looks on their faces was, one of hope or desperation or fear that, is my family member one of the victims, or did they lose their cell phone in this process, and I just can't get a hold of them? So,
and it's just stories like this. It's too often the police, when they make the news, it's a negative thing for the police. And when people deal with a police officer, generally speaking, they're having a bad day to begin with, no matter what the situation may be. And the police have a bad rap, oftentimes. But yet here you are talking about, rescuing people and saving their lives and, risking your own life to do it. And that needs to be addressed more. I mean, I obviously, like the George Floyd situation, that is, tragic, and that cop deserves all the punishment that he gets. But at the same time, all the good cops that were at Von Maur, all the good cops that were dealing with the crazy guy with the sword and all the other things that, you do to keep the streets safe, sometimes that doesn't get maybe the attention that it should get.
Yeah, in 2020, there's about 700,000 cops in the United States. And I would venture to guess that most of them at some point, and whether you want to call that, had put their life on the line or risked their lives. I know in my 23 years, I did it dozens and dozens of times, if not hundreds of times. And you know how many times I knew who the victim was that I was trying to help out? 0.
Yeah.
It wasn't like I was going to try to go save a family member. Cops put themselves out there for people they don't even know who it is, and that they're putting themselves in jeopardy. And, again, it's not every day for every cop, but every day cops all across the country do extremely dangerous things that people don't understand or even hear about, and they do it for people they don't know, no idea who it is.
Let's talk a little bit about your first undercover case. You bought guns and meth.
I did.
Okay, your first undercover case. How did that all come about?
So my partner, Edie, at the time, fantastic narcotics investigator, she had an informant who had stated, hey, I got a guy who wants to sell guns and dope. And I'm like, I'm in if you want to use me. And I was chomping at the bit to do undercover work. And so I'd taken any opportunity that came to me. And so ended up being, he wanted to sell guns. So we're like, hey, let's set up a meeting. So I met him just south of 49th and L. And I drove this tiny little car at the time. And there wasn't even, it was a 2-door car. So there was no fourth door. And so the plan was when we pull up to have the informant jump in the back seat. And so the suspect could sit in the front seat with me. And I don't speak Spanish other than command Spanish, and that doesn't really work well in a drug deal. And he didn't speak English, so the informant was translating for us. And as soon as he got in the car, he gave me a gun, but instantly he put his hand back under his coat. And from my training experience, he was holding a pistol inside of his coat. And so for me, I'm like, okay, this could be nasty real quick. But my left hand was on my gun. And so we're doing this deal back and forth. His right hand is stuck in his coat, and he's dealing with his left hand, giving me the gun and the dope. My left hand's on my gun, and I'm taking stuff with my right hand. Here's two guys who are not speaking the same language, and we're only using one hand. But we muddled through the deal, and he was extremely nervous the whole time. He kept looking out the window like he
was nervous. How did you feel?
Oh, I was nervous.
Yeah, I mean, not terrible. Yeah.
We were both nervous.
But the other guy was nervous. Yeah, sure. No, it was the other guy. Nervous.
Yeah. But he kept looking out the window like the raid team was going to come. And there was a raid team. He was right. They weren't going to take him down. But anyways, so the deal went off successfully, and the guys in my crew teased me that the audio coming out of the car sounded like some caveman talking because I was not being the most audible. But anyways, the funny part is, or I guess the semi-scary part was, like a week later, Edie asked me if I wanted to buy another gun from Jesus. And I'm like, hell yeah, I want to do it. She says, well, I'm not going to let you do it. I'm not going to let you say yes until I tell you some information. I'm like, okay, what happened? She says, well, we're pretty much convinced that he had just killed two people, like at 11th and Grace at this mechanic shop as part of a cartel hit. And she's like, but the chances are pretty low that they're going to be able to convict him on those homicides. But some more guns from him would be a really good conviction. So I'm like, well, sign me up. Let's do it. So I ended up buying from him a couple more times, guns and drugs at the same time. And, as life would have it, I got injured on a SWAT operation and had to be put on limited duty for several months because of a knee surgery. And Edie ended up taking that case, and she got Officer of the Year for it because it was such a good case. And I had to watch the end of it from the sidelines, which was kind of a bummer, but I was happy for her.
We'll get to the cartel thing in a second here, but I want to talk also about this case here with Jesus. He also sold you meth and wanted you to take the meth.
Yeah.
How did you get out of that?
So I got to leave some stuff operational secure. I always had an excuse built in, and with him, I just teased him about I only like to party if I'm with women, and he giggled and I giggled, and the informant giggled. But as an undercover, you have to be prepared for that, and you obviously can't use drugs. So I always had a bunch of different types of excuses built in, generally ahead of time, so it wouldn't be as big of a question back and forth in the car as to, come on, try it. But it's also about, not being nervous about it and kind of, having your story backfilled and who you are and what you are and why you're doing what you're doing. And, it's generally about this.
Do they? I mean, I can understand some guys buying, I'm too old to only use the drugs to get, have sex and that. But I could also understand some guys saying, no, do the meth, and then, pointing a gun right at you. If it came down to them, shooting you or threatening to shoot you and you having to do a drug, could you do the drug? Would you be able to legally do it, or what would the situation be in a case like that?
Well, so legally, yeah, you would be okay. However, what I would have done is slow played it, and which I have done, slow played it, and engaged the guy in some type of defensive conversation, and that's when the arrest team was coming, because they're listening the whole time. They can hear what's going on, and there would be certain things I would say or do that would create a reaction from the rescue team or the cover team, and so I just would slow play it. And I had to slow play it a couple times, but never to the point of my life was in jeopardy. But hey, this case is taking a turn. We're going to end it right now and just get this guy arrested.
Do they make you take, when you're getting trained to be undercover cop, do they make you take any kind of acting lessons? Because I mean, I would think that, here you are, you're a regular cop, then you end up on the SWAT team, and now they want you to be undercover. Well, there's a difference between directing traffic and responding to domestic violence cases, and now all of a sudden having to deal with a guy that's, transporting illegal guns. How do you act like you're one of the bad guys?
So I'll tell you this, a couple of different things. Number one, I went to a class after I already started doing it. Number two, I wasn't very good at first. I learned a lot of lessons along the way. Number three, there were some guys who went before me who would give me tips, and I could see what they did and how they did it. The Dan Clarks and the Bobby Branches of the world, who I would watch them do deals, or I would go on undercover deals with them and see how they handled certain things, and the testing of drugs, like you asked if you're offered. There's ways to kind of fake that you're going to taste it or test it, that tricks the bad guy. But there's other things, again, that I'll leave out that can kind of get you out of it. But it's just it's kind of some gamesmanship, And again, I think without them knowing, if you pre-plant a seed of an idea, that's the way to do it. And then additionally, then the whole undercover realm of it, you need to be in control, but you need to let the bad guy think he's calling the shots. And so that's a big part of it. How do you play this person? Like a play him like a violin in some sorts. You're controlling, but you let them think they're in control.
Let's talk about the cartels.
Okay.
So now all of a sudden you're playing. You're starting off as doing some minor drug deals with Jesus, and then Jesus is involved in a cartel situation. So now you're dealing with another level, murderer and alleged murderer and everything. You wound up selling guns for drugs to the cartel, right?
I did.
How does that happen?
So again, generally there's some type of meeting, and whether it's a meeting through an informant or through an unwitting, one bad guy has no idea you're the cops, and he wants to introduce you to his friend. So sometimes an unwitting does it. But again, I was approached by a guy who said, "Hey, my friend wants to buy guns, so we're going to reverse the roles. We're going to sell guns at this point." And if it was just a nobody, then we wouldn't do it. But once we get the background of the suspects, like, okay, this was a good target. A lot of planning goes involved in that. And at the time, I was a task force officer with the ATF, and the ATF has what we call prop guns. They're real guns. They're just guns that are held without a service to be used, for the furtherance of investigations. They could be laying in a room to make it look like you're a bad guy, or you can use them to sell. In this particular instance, what the public needs to know, those guns never hit the street. If we're selling drugs, which we do, or guns, which we do, that means that it's an immediate arrest. Whereas if we're buying, sometimes we won't make an arrest immediately because we're letting the case build itself. But if we're ever selling, then somebody's getting arrested immediately. And
how do the authorities know that if you're selling, you're doing it on behalf of the force and not doing it, to make a little extra side money?
Oh, well, that's all. It's all. That particular case is done with the permission of the Assistant United States Attorney here in Nebraska that we worked with, and with our upper command and the ATF's upper command. This isn't just an ad hoc, hey, I got a phone call, let's go sell some guns and do something. This is a highly choreographed event.
I would imagine, and I mean no disrespect by this, so I would imagine, though, you're an adrenaline junkie, that you like the rush, right? Would it be fair to call you that?
It's interesting you say that, Tom, and I've been asked a bunch, and especially with the book coming out, am I an adrenaline junkie now? And absolutely not now. I didn't consider myself an adrenaline junkie. I bungee jumped once back in college, and I didn't intentionally do things outside of the job that were, like this huge thrill-seeking stuff. And so when I've talked to other people about that, they're like, well, that's because you got all of it on the job. And part of that is right. The strange part is when I was a young guy serving search warrants or doing regular stuff in a cruiser, pursuits and fights, man, that adrenaline's coursing through your body. You just feel it, man. I got cut once on a foot pursuit at 40 stitches on my forearm, and I didn't bleed. And it was all the way down to the muscle. It was because your body in those situations pools the blood to the important organs when it's life and death type of thing. So that your body physiologically can do some things like that. But as a young guy and a young SWAT guy and a young gang guy, young narc guy, yeah, I used to feel the adrenaline dumps. But I got to be brutally honest, the last 5 years of being on SWAT, we'd go after a known homicide suspect to ram his door. I'm going to break the door down. And I didn't get adrenaline dumps that at least were noticeable. I think I had so many from the job, as so many cops do, is that towards the end, you just don't get it anymore. And if you are getting it, you don't feel it, which is probably not a good thing.
I think that might be a risk.
It's good. Actually, it's good and bad. Number one, it's good because you're calmer. But number two, hopefully it's not because you're not in tune. But I never felt that I was not in tune, that I wasn't ready to go. It wasn't like I just was not paying attention. It's just that, hey, I've done this thousands of times, so it's just kind of what you do.
Was there ever any kind of a temptation to be on the dark side? In other words, to do maybe a double agent sort of a thing, or, where maybe you were actually one of the bad guys for a while too, just to, you know what I'm saying? I mean, I would think that with some people at least, that might be a temptation, or it has been a temptation in the past.
Oh, I'm sure I know there's probably guys that have gone down that route. I wouldn't say locally, but, you see cops in my position that can kind of go bad sometimes, but absolutely not, never with me. My bio dad was a heroin dealer when I was a young kid. Luckily, I grew up in the house with my stepdad, who raised me to be the man I am. But, there's a lot of self-checks out there with guys on your crew, even if it's nothing nefarious. It's like, hey, you're kind of turning into an a-hole these days. Why don't you get your poop in a group and, straighten back up. You're not this bad guy that you think you are. But no, as far as like illegal stuff, no, not even close.
You mentioned that your wife was also a cop.
Yes.
That's got to be a hard family life. Now what did she do for the force?
So she did a lot for the force. She worked in many, many different units, coming up as an officer, narcotics and homicide and training academy, you name it, she worked it. And then as a sergeant, she did the same thing. She also started running the hostage negotiations unit, which she continued to run until the day she retired after 30 years. And she was on the event that night when I had my shooting. So she had been there and done that and seen things and been involved in officer-involved shootings, on the scenes and investigating them. And just a really great spouse and a tough lady that probably who kept me on the rails for all those years.
So she had to worry about you when you went to work. You had to worry about her when she went to work. And
yeah, interesting enough, we had some great neighbors. There was a time frame when on SWAT we were super busy, and our daughter was young. And literally right across the street from us was another cop that we worked with and his wife, great people. And if the pager went off at 2 a.m. for a barricaded gunman, well, SWAT's going out, and so are the hostage negotiators. So that's both of us. And so I would just leave first. My wife would wake my daughter up, take her across the street. And we already had garage codes and things, and they had a small room set up in there for her. And we would just text Maggie, say, hey, we dropped Bella off tonight. Can you get her to school in the morning? And their son was the same age as our daughter, and they were playmates. And so yeah, we 2 a.m. it's time to go, and we always had a built-in place for her to be. So
your daughter growing up in a situation like that's not a normal childhood life. Mom and dad are both cops. Mom and dad are both in high-level dangerous situations. Talking about your daughter wound up in law enforcement as well, right?
Yeah, she's an amazing young lady. She currently works for the federal government, and she's working on her master's program. And where she goes from there, it's going to be up to her. But yeah, we couldn't have been blessed with a better daughter. She's awesome.
That's very cool. So what are you doing now? Besides writing a book, the book is Ram 1, the true crime stories of working undercover and breaking down doors on the SWAT team.
So I retired after 23 years of full-time duty, and I went back almost 2 years ago now, working part-time, helping on the range with firearms classes or firearm certifications, also working at the academy with new recruits when they need help out there, and any other small little project that they might come up with. Aside from that, I do train for an outside company based out of Chicago. And I do some other one-off jobs here and there with security issues when there's big events in town, like the Berkshire Hathaway meeting, things like that. Try to put the skills to work a little bit, but otherwise just try to relax a little bit and enjoy some time.
we talked about some of the cases that you were on, some of the events that you dealt with, high-profile event here in town. Is there one that we didn't talk about that really sticks in your mind as far as whether it be undercover, whether it be on the SWAT team, that really sticks in your mind about, how you finished the day and said, yeah, today I done good?
The today I done good part, I'm not sure. There's lots of those, but probably the biggest pivotal moment in my career was when Jason Bratt was killed. We were partners, and
for people that don't know, Jason Bratt was a police officer here in town. Yeah.
He was killed in September of 2003, and we were partners for a time. And I just held him in such high regard, and that really was a dark period in my life, but also a dark period in the life of OPD for a long time. So that was a real pivotal moment in my career. Finally coming to grips with that, and then changing a little bit who I am, but. I also lost Greg Hamill, a narcotics partner of mine, and then Kerry Roscoe got killed. Those 3 days are probably the days that I remember anything more, about my career than even my shooting. They're when you lose a cop, it's a bad day, and I would do every day over again, minus those 3 days.
Is it different? Because you put your own life at risk. You knew that you could have been one of those officers. You could have been one of those names on the wall. But then when you see somebody else do it, somebody else that ends up paying that price, does it affect you in a way where you don't think about it for yourself? But when you see it with somebody else, it I don't know that I'm getting my thoughts out here about, just psychologically, I would think that would have to resonate in such a way as like, oh yeah, this stuff is getting real.
Yeah, it's interesting you say that. And my mother meant nothing by it, but when Jason was killed, she called, and of course I wasn't answering. We were busy. Well, she finally got through. She's like, "Oh, I'm so glad it wasn't you." And my response was, "Mom, it was somebody's kid."
Yeah, yeah.
Those words will never leave my mind.
Yeah, it was somebody's kid.
Yeah.
By the way, and as I recall the story, that somebody's kid's father was also a police officer, was he not?
Jason Pratt, no.
No, I thought he was for some reason. I guess
no. His brother was a police officer in Lincoln.
Okay,
yes.
Brother. Okay, I knew there was a family connection there somewhere. Anyway, the book is called Ram 1, available on Amazon, right?
It is.
Where else can they get it?
At the Omaha Police Federal Credit Union.
All right.
Yep.
All right, good. I haven't read the whole book yet, to be honest, but I have read a lot of it, and it is interesting, because this is real life. This is the cases that you had to deal with, the things that you saw, and it as I say, it's a true crime story right here in Omaha. We think of Omaha as being a relatively safe town, but even as I was reading the book, there were some neighborhoods you were talking about that weren't that. I didn't even think about as being a bad neighborhood, but there's stuff going on all the time that we don't even really know about, isn't there?
Yeah, and that's the thing. There's crime in all cities, right? And Omaha has a lower crime rate, but there's way more crime that gets reported, and there's way more drugs that gets reported. And, crime is not specific to one geographical area. It's not North Omaha, South Omaha. In Omaha, it's the whole city. Obviously, there's higher numbers of certain crimes in certain parts of the town, but, I bought a lot of dope in West Omaha and did a lot of search warrants in West Omaha. So the other point is, Tom, is that so much of that goes on that you don't know about because you're a good citizen. There generally is no reason for you to know about those things because they don't make the news.
Mm-hmm.
The OPD or any police department doesn't come out. So learn about all these cases that were not newsworthy today. The suicides and whatever it may be, the big drug busts. These guys. I still check with the guys I used to work with, and they're taking off 100-pound loads of meth. There's no press releases on that. So it's just more than people want to know
100 pounds,
about.
I think there is. No, really? Because I do see the stories where, they pulled over somebody driving on the interstate and they found.
That's different. The interdiction stops usually get hit the news, but where we take it off here in town, I don't recall seeing any press conferences in the last several years.
Is that to protect the undercover cops?
Sometimes could be, yeah, or just to protect the ongoing aspect of the investigation, but just more of the point that there's way more here than people think there is, and that's what I try to talk about in the book. And it's not a, it's not a book that says damning the city, but I love this city, love this department, and I had a great run, and I try to be brutally honest in that book, not only about what goes on here, but also about myself and the things that I screwed up and might not have done right and could have been better at, and just cops in general, trying to give you and the viewers, listeners, what's a day in the life like here in Omaha.
And boy, I'll tell you, I got so many other questions I want to get to. You talked about the crime and everything here, and we talked about this early on in the interview. So much of it has to do with mental health. I've been preaching this for years. We don't do enough about mental health. We had the case here of the what's his name, Bear Hills, Zachary Bear Hills, where that wound up being died in police custody, dealing with severe mental health issues. But you've got domestic violence issues like the sword story we talked about. You've got people the drug issues. Fentanyl's a big problem here. Meth is still a problem here, and all these other societal ills. That if we did more for mental health, you're never going to get rid of it entirely. But if we did more for mental health, you'd be able to make your job a hell of a lot easier.
Yeah, 100%. It's one of our country's biggest failures. Between that and addiction, those are our two biggest failures in this country. We talk about veterans. Well, they fall in both of those categories, so I'm not leaving them out. They're part of both of those categories. But those are our biggest failures. We spend billions and billions of dollars on whatever project you name that really doesn't benefit Americans per se, but we spend pennies on mental health. And you can drive by any bus stop downtown and see a guy, a homeless man on the bench having a violent argument with himself. He should be somewhere. There's nowhere to put him.
Yeah,
there's nowhere to put that guy.
Yeah.
And police end up interacting with those guys because they disrupt citizens walking by, or they disrupt a small business. Now law enforcement has to come into contact with that guy who literally had been there punching himself in the face because he's arguing with himself. Well, now the cop's going to go hands-on with this guy. That's never going to be pretty, ever.
The number one mental health facility in this county is the Douglas County Jail.
Yeah.
And that's just wrong.
Yep.
That's just wrong. Okay, last question. I'll let you go. When you're working undercover, are you working undercover specifically for guns and drugs, and somebody else is working undercover for sex trafficking, and somebody else is working undercover for theft and robbery? I mean, do you have your specialties, or are you just working undercover with bad guys and see where it sort of goes?
I'm trying to be cautious about this. I would do everything but basically the sex crimes, and there's other people who dabble in that area. But being as my face is out there, I don't want to have it any different for other people that do those cases. Yeah, but I didn't work on those, so I was pretty specific.
When you say you wanted to be careful about what you had to say, why did you have to be careful about what you would say in that answer? That didn't seem like that was a question that would give away any real specific.
Well, I don't want to dime out, people or, how many people do a certain thing. Because OPD still investigates a lot of different crimes, and whether it's undercover or whether it's through use of informants or unwittings, it's you got to be a little bit cautious. Can't give you all the secrets,
Yeah. Okay. All right. Well, the book is an interesting read, and been really a thrill talking to you, Paul Milone. The book, Ram One. Get it on Amazon.com. And Paul, best of luck to you. Thank you very much for being here.
I appreciate it.
Join us next time for another episode of Becca's Talking.